Hi everyone, my name is Andy Polefrone. I'm a second year MLA student here at the Knowlton School. And first I want to start by thanking the Columbus Foundation for making this possible, as well as the Knowlton School. The Knowlton faculty for their invaluable advice, especially Christy for her guidance. Colleen Hamelman, without whom my work would have been much more difficult. And finally, thank you to David Villegas Garcia and ARTA for your generosity and for taking me into your working lives. I spent about a month traveling in Medellin, Colombia, and I decided to go to Colombia after coming across the work of geographer Colleen Hamelman, who has traced the connection between urban agriculture and coping with food insecurity in Medellin's informal neighborhoods, the comunas. I was initially interested in understanding how it was tied into other landscape systems in Medellin. As I interviewed residents of the comunas, representatives from Medellin's planning department, and the organizations that mediate between them, it became clear that urban agriculture can be a crucial factor in increasing resilience in informal settlements. I believe that examples in Medellin show that designers and planners have a place in this, but only when we are willing to listen to and follow the logic already established by these communities. Today, I'll talk about two organizations, ARTA and Salvaterra, which exemplify this approach. So while in Colombia, I had a chance to meet with a number of community leaders. One was Aka, the man in the bucket hat on the right, and the founder of the first organization I'll talk to you about, a hip-hop urban agriculture collective called ARTA. Aka is an insistent speaker and told me repeatedly in our time together, no me digas pobrecito. Don't say to me, oh, poor guy. He was referring to the influx of tourists visiting the neighborhood, who tend to view him with something like pity. To Aka, the tourists represent the transformation of his neighborhood from war zone to tourist destination, but also a threat to the identity of the comuna. Aka's parents grew up in the countryside, caught in the middle of violence between the Colombian government and the FARC, a revolutionary guerrilla movement that from the 1970s until relatively recently controlled much of rural Colombia. Like many of the estimated 7 million Colombians who are displaced internally, Aka's parents fled to Medellin's comunas like this, the informal settlements that ring around the formal city. Medellin lies in a river valley, and once you move up from the valley floor, you mostly move out of the formal city and into those unauthorized neighborhoods. Historically, they've been disconnected from jobs and basic services. When Pablo Escobar recruited for his Medellin cartel in the 80s, he recruited from the comunas because conditions there were often so desperate. Aka grew up in Comuna 13, which would become the most violent neighborhood in Medellin, and by extension, one of the most violent neighborhoods in the world. Between 2001 and 2004, the police and military launched a devastating series of sieges in the neighborhood. At Aka's count, 23 of them. Aka told me repeatedly, you can't understand the violence we've seen, but also don't pity us, we're rich. We build everything that we need. But before talking more about ARTA, I'd like to take a look at some of the spatial qualities inherent to informal settlements in Medellin. One common pattern is what theorist Sarah Goldhagen calls chunking. The building of overlapping structure without any sort of grid, where streets and open areas are made from leftover space. In the comunas, houses are stacked on top of each other, and stairs form avenues between them. Small plazas form at the top and bottom, houses use improvised balconies as shop space, and the most important stair avenues are typically painted with bright colors. They are also urban agricultural space, where the greatest particularly steep plantain trees are planted to stabilize the hill. When less so, residents plant staples like maize and yucca. More private stairways are typically planted with vegetables and aromatics used for cooking and for home remedies. While talking with families in the comunas, I discovered that this is a consistent pattern. For example, the woman who lives here, Laura, works in and eats from the plantain plots on the right. Closer to her home, there are semi-public plantings of vegetables and a shared chicken flock. On her patio, she grows specific aromatics, herbs, and decorative plants for her family. Here and across Medellin, urban agriculture exists on a consistent but blurry public to private gradient, from stable crops to kitchen gardens. I don't think that we should take it as a given that informal neighborhoods will necessarily produce urban agriculture. Aka likes to point out that Medellin is a somewhat specific case, that in Medellin agriculture is culture, Most of the population in the comunas have agricultural roots, and older residents still have rich agricultural knowledge. In Comuna Trece, which has recently become more integrated into the formal city, homes still operate on the same gradient I just described. Staple crops in shared homes, in shared public lots, vegetables and fruit trees on patios, and chickens, aromatics, and culinary plants on the roof. One of Aka's neighbors even grows coffee, both for the emotional tie to his childhood and for financial benefit. He keeps some, gives away more, and sells the rest to a tienda down the street. It's really, really good coffee. ArTA offers programs ranging from hip-hop freestyle classes to trauma support groups, but ties it all together with food. It relies on older community members, both as garden managers and teachers of heritage. By pairing this with hip-hop and street culture, ARTA can draw in those at risk of adopting an identity of violence out of trauma or social pressure, and offer an alternative agricultural identity that is already deeply ingrained in their own history. ARTA seeks to show that by taking over the space around them for productive means, they can occupy their neighborhoods in productive ways that in turn give them power. ArTA is anchored in its spatial context in ways that mirror its informal roots. It uses a neighboring cemetery as its nursery and for water and storage. The school next to the cemetery provides space for weekend markets, and ArTA plants food plants in strips along the road. Memorial plantings along the cemetery wall reframe tragic violence in terms of the vivacity of the garden itself. ArTA has found a way to occupy space in a neighborhood changing fast and retain an important cultural foothold outside the institutional framework. In Colombia, however, the institutional framework is actually beginning to catch up. When the city has evicted people from informal settlements and placed them in large apartment blocks without the spatial systems that they rely on, they've consistently struggled to adapt. So the city pivoted. Grassroots political action in the 90s and aughts focused on reframing the Medellin narrative and swept in a series of nonpartisan professor mayors that introduced the Movimiento Compromiso Ciudadano, which translates roughly to the Citizen Compromise movement. Instead of removing the comunas, it focused on extending services, mobility, and public space to them in order to bridge the gap between the formal and the informal city. Informal commuter roads have been improved instead of wiped clean. Bright yellow bridges and railings have been added to stairways, adding both accessibility and wayfinding. Most famously, the city has connected the comunas to the city center with the Metrocable, a funicular system that winds up the hills, and extended basic services with water treatment facilities that double as public parks. The Jardín Circunvalar is one of the city's newest projects, and possibly the most integrated. It is a commuter ring road that connects communities that were once separate violent rivals and articulates their connection with playgrounds, soccer fields, schools, and parks. It also manages to direct informal growth by making dangerous slopes inaccessible. Talking with one of the project's designers, Julian Gomez, I learned that this trade-off is design. He stressed that the EDU, the city's planning department, must balance the city's need for safe conditions with the comuna's need for autonomy. In the Jardín Circunvalar, this involves offering space that doesn't just perform, but that is available for productive use. The second organization that I want to highlight today, Salvaterra, is helping to manage that productive implementation. Led by David Villegas Garcia, the organization identifies spaces along the Jardín Circunvalar ideal for urban agriculture. Plots vary in size, but they use the same logic of the comunas writ large. Leftover space carved out by the Jardín Circunvalar is used to provide community-managed agriculture. Salvaterra employs community leaders with high wages and health benefits who in turn grow food for the neighborhood. Salvaterra is able to secure land tenure for large plots specifically because they concentrate on a green solution for areas at risk of landslide or deforestation. By maintaining deep-rooted plants, again, like plantains, plots are capable of stabilizing the hillside and protecting existing neighborhoods while directing growth into areas the city is willing to cede to informal settlement. This project not only works with the logic of the people involved, it reframes urban agriculture as a landscape tool capable of multifaceted performance. As landscape architects, I believe we can use examples like this to examine urban agriculture as an important urban system, especially as a way of finding compromises between the formal and informal zones in our own cities. Because of its specific history, Medellin has been doing this for a long time. It's learned to work with the kinds of informality that are becoming increasingly prevalent around the rest of the world. If we ignore the ways that residents of informal settlements plan space around them, we ignore the evidence of their needs and the steps they've already taken to provide for themselves. Organizations like ARTA and Salvaterra demonstrate that it is not only possible to listen to the logic of the informal settlements, but crucial to preserving the dignity and the livelihood of the people who live there. Thank you so much.